and oh, sorry.
Now go.
Hey everyone, welcome to Live and Unscripted. I'm Susan Smith and you're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. Oh, we're playing around with new graphics and Mr. Producer and I did not coordinate very well, so sorry about that. Anyway, welcome to the show. It feels like half an age since we've been together here, so it's fun to do this evening for me, early evening, late afternoon. And today's project is mini quilts. I have a client who sent me 10 of them, and I'm going to do at least 2 tonight, maybe 3, but I brought 4 because one of them I'm going to make viewer's choice. So be prepared to weigh in on your favorite one and which one you'd rather see. So again, we've been doing Live and Unscripted for quite a while, and we often will do our hellos and welcomes and where's everyone tuning in from, so Mr. Producer can do sound checks. So tonight he's informed me we're not doing that. This is all getting kept. However, I do want to say hello to a few of you before we dive into the actual show. So let's do that for a second and make sure that things are running smoothly. Marga, hi Susan and Dave from the Netherlands. Awesome. Thanks for tuning in. And Jean, windy and cold in New Jersey. Isn't that true of a lot of North America right now? Debbie, hey everyone. So happy to be here as I didn't think I could, but my hubby made dinner and is sitting here with me while I watch and interact. That's so nice, Debbie. Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Diane, hi from East Wenatchee. Welcome home. Thanks, Diane. We know each other in real life, actually. And welcome back, Ocean Cruisers. I bet there's a few of you here tonight. How fun is that? And Shelly, oh boy, I missed these. Can't wait. Me too. Me too. I enjoy these so much. Debbie, Susan, you look nice and tan. I think that's actually just the camera lighting that's changed, Debbie. I didn't have very much time to sit in the sun and really came home with no appreciable tan. Erin, hello from Washington. Erin's my helper and assistant and bouncer of ideas. Joan, hey Joan, haven't seen you here in a while. This is great. Okay, let's go on into the show. We're going to work on several minis tonight, and one of the topics that I promised you was how I load several at a time for efficiency. So this is going to be a great example of how I think through things and pivot on the fly. Let me grab the backing and show you what I mean. I'm going to set my coffee mug down. Don't even need a sip to get started. Let's just grab this backing. Sorry, I'm off camera for a sec. I've got all my things arranged here. Okay, these are my quilt backings. My client's name is Laura, by the way, because I'll keep referring to her. You might as well know who it is. And so here are the backing pieces, and Laura has seamed them all end to end. Now, each of the little quilts are about 11 or 12 by 17 inches. And so each of these rectangles then, can you see that top to bottom, is enough for one of those. So generally when Laura sends me minis, there's fewer. There's maybe 3, 4, or 5, and I load them this way. So my rectangles of backing are loaded this way on the long arm, which is pretty efficient because she's got a nice straight edge, top and bottom. I have enough throat space depth in my machine that I can fit that whole 17-inch or so quilt in it, and I can lay one piece of batting across all those different backings and then lay my little minis on top and proceed to quilt. Since Laura has put all 10 of them together, I kind of thought for a minute, do I want to undo those seams and reorganize them? And then I thought, why don't I try something different and see how it works? And I practiced it once this afternoon so I could be sure that it would. So what I'm going to do is actually load them this way, right? So it's going to be one little quilt after another on my long arm rail. And we'll see how that goes. Now I've got to say here too, Laura is an absolutely dream client. And if she's here, I hope she is here hearing me say that, because what she does is label everything. So every one of these backings is labeled. There's a ghost quilt. There's a scarecrow quilt. There's a red, black, and white quilt. Every backing is labeled and every mini quilt is labeled. And the tops are marked. And it's just a piece of paper with a pin. But that is so helpful as a long armor. So if you are a long armor, know that you can ask your people to do that when they bring quilts. And it is just so helpful to just know which end is top and which goes to which. And I'm leaving all these papers on here and just removing them as I come to each quilt because there are 10 and I don't want to get confused. So all I did was make sure the pins are running horizontally in my little note, and they're just going to roll right up with my backings. So I'm just going to start at this front edge as I always do. I've got a nice straight edge here. Gonna run my little red snapper along this front edge. Now, the reason that I kind of thought this through and wondered how will it work is because this is so long and there's so many seams and the chances of it rolling on perfectly straight are not great. So this is where I'm going to pay a little attention and do it a wee bit differently than I sometimes do. Whew, there's a couple yards of that going over the back of the frame. I am going to walk around to the other side of my frame and make sure, actually Mr. Producer is doing that for me, that it is mostly straight. You can just kind of accordion pleat down there. What are you looking at? Mr. Producer has questions in his eyes. Yeah, just like that will be fine. So all I want to do is make this basically straight with me across the frame. And now as I roll it on, I'm going to watch that roll. You won't be able to see it, unfortunately, on camera, but I'm going to make sure that it's not veering to the left or veering to the right, that the whole thing, which is trimmed up straight, is rolling on in a straight roll. So we'll be good to go. So let me just undo my handy little clips and we'll start rolling it up. And I think because it's so small, I'm going to actually stand right here and do it at the front and in the middle. There we go. So I'm just watching as it starts going around whole revolutions on my roller, and I'm literally just going to adjust it left or right as needed to keep it rolling on straight. I told you it's a few yards. Takes a minute to roll it. Oh, went a little too far. Not paying attention at the other end. Unwrap a couple inches. Grab my other red snapper. I'm just going to move my marker. And now we have one nice, long, skinny backing rolled on. So from here, my plan is just to proceed and do the little mini quilts in the order that I've chosen. I certainly could choose to do them number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. But that's not, in fact, what I want to quilt tonight, that first orange one. So I'm going to change that up a little bit. I'm going to back up just a touch. So again, you probably can't see on camera, but I see with that last little bit, I veered almost ½ an inch. To me, that's too much inaccuracy. So I'm going to back up a little bit and shift that fabric just a touch. I want it to be right. These are small quilts, so it's really easy to redo this a second at this end. Leader back over. So I've just shifted it about ½ an inch to the side that was running short. We'll see if that looks a little better. And honestly, if I have to, I'll do this again. I do want it to be right. There we go. That looks good. Perfect. Okay, now let's look at our little minis. I'm just grabbing all 4 of them here. Those of you who get my newsletter, I had a picture in there of all 10 because one of them is an ugly sweater, mini quilt. It's hysterical. I loved it. One that I want to do tonight for sure is this little flying geese one. Isn't that cute? So that's a for sure. This one I'm pretty sure of as well, the red and white and black, and that's the whole quilt right there. And then here's the viewer's choice. Okay, hang on a second. I was putting things away and I inadvertently put away the other one. Let me just run to my other room for a jiffy. Got it. Okay, viewer's choice. This one is the Comedy Club, the Quilters Comedy Club. And I thought you guys might be interested in that because this might be a challenging one to think, what in the world to quilt on that? Because there are 10 of them, I don't want to spend, for example, 2 hours a piece, right? That would be 20 hours of quilting. That's a lot. I don't guess Laura wants to pay for that either. So I try and keep these on average to an hour or less. One or two of them will take longer. One or two of them will be shorter, but I try to aim for that. And then this is the other viewer's choice, strawberries in a pot on a fun background. Now this one I feel like is more interesting because of the different colors, but I think you see this type of quilt more, and therefore this might be easier for you to decide what to quilt. So I welcome Comedy Club or Strawberry Pot for choices, right? You guys chime in. Mr. Producer's got a poll running. Oh yes, he's reminding you answer the poll rather than just put your comment in the list, right? And I should mention too, throughout this entire session, feel free to ask questions, pithy comments, whatever you have to say about what I'm quilting. But if you have a question, would you put a QQ in front of it? And that way we can search for the questions and pull them up. Some of these quilts are going to have custom quilting, so I've got to pay attention. So I probably will quilt for periods of time and then stop and take questions in between.
For 50-50, are you doing them both?
Mr. Producer's saying if it's 50-50 and am I doing them both? Well, if we all want to stay here till midnight, you know. So where shall we put these? We're going to do the flying geese first. Yes, we are. Couple more thoughts. Again, an example of something that the perfect client does. Laura gives me lovely instructions with her thoughts. And sometimes her thoughts are, I'm not sure what to do with this, do whatever you like. And sometimes her thoughts are, I have this idea, but maybe you want to add to it. And sometimes she'll say, don't do this one thing. As a long armor, that is incredibly helpful. So again, if you quilt for other people, encourage them to, like, they don't have to think through it all or make a full plan for you, but to give you some feedback, some feel for what it is that they're looking for. This is so helpful. Okay, I was going to read you guys the strawberry one because it has a cute story. Strawberry pot. The pieces, including the pot, were found in the stash of a late friend of mine. It was a very old kit. So old, in fact, I had to change needles about 6 times because the glue kept sticking. Anyway, use your magic quilting touch. So that will be a fun one. So again, you guys vote Strawberry Pot or Comedy Club. But we're going to start with the flying geese. Make a little pile beside me.
We're 56-44. We've been as close as 49-51.
It's running just about 50-50. You guys. Okay, another funny story. These batting bits. Late last fall, I taught locally at a quilt show, and I had we were doing kind of table runner sized things, and I had some helpers who were cutting batting pieces for me with scissors that had a blade about this long, so across 120 inches of batting. Anyway, these were kind of the squares and bits left over, and I'm super frugal. So I saved them all, especially because I know Laura's always sending me minis. So I've got them ordered from smallest to largest, and I'm just going to root through them and find these batting scraps that will suit the project we're working on. And I think the smallest one will do my flying geese, so we'll put that down. And now what we've got to do is roll until we get the flying geese backing. And this orange one is not it. I know that already. That's for the ghost quilt top. Pretty sure that print is it. Let's double check. Burnt orange, offset flying geese. Bingo. See what I'm saying? This is so great when Laura's got it all organized for me. So I'm just laying my batting. I can see the fold line of my batting, so it doesn't really have a grain like fabric, but just because I am laying it on there straight with what was once the fold line. Putting my mini quilt in, and we're going to start quilting it. So on this one, I'm going to do a little bit of ruler work. So I'm going to set up my machine with the ruler plate, which you'll be able to watch me doing. It's pretty simple. This little plate just snaps over top of the nose of the long arm. And if you're not familiar with a ruler plate, it is a critical piece of equipment if you want to do any ruler work. I'll show you actually why, because then it will make sense. If I were to lay a ruler on this little footprint, it would so easily rock, you know, if I had any pressure on the ends of it. So giving this extension table of larger area to rest that ruler on is really key. And as far as I know, every long arm brand has a version of this, because now you see I've got a nicer table to work upon. And I see that my needle came unthreaded, so let's quickly thread that. And then let's talk thread for a second before we start quilting. I debated, you know, which thread to use overall and then which thread to use for this quilt specifically. So first off, I made the decision I'm going to use different thread on each little quilt. I like to make that pretty and match. Because they're tiny, people are apt to get up close to them to look at them, so it's important to me that that looks good. On this little quilt, though, at this moment, I'm thinking of using caramel thread all the way through, and here it is. Can you see it back there? Color 1133 Isacord. It is 100% poly thread in a 40 weight. So I'm going to start by basting it, doing a little bit of the stitching in the ditch to stabilize it and make everything square. And then when I get to the black border, that's the place where I thought I might possibly change and do a black thread, but I'll decide that when I get there. So this same fabric is the backing, but I've chosen to have that caramely color of thread top and bottom. I like matching thread top and bottom, or very close to that. I also like to put my, engage my belts when I'm doing minis. So what that does is make my machine really drag when it's going, how shall I say, it wants to go vertically and horizontally exactly. And I'm just going to reach over, and I may be out of camera for a second, and get my computer going. I didn't think of this sooner. This is a Bernina specific thing. When we have our channels or our belts engaged, hang on a sec while I'm thinking here. When we have the belts engaged on a Bernina, we also have something that's called an easy glide. So we can turn that on where there's resistance to going out of line, but it will go. If I don't have that easy glide on, and I have to have my computer going for that, then there's strong resistance. So I actually can't quilt really at all. So that's why I'm booting up my computer so I can put that easy glide on. Long story to explain what I'm doing. If I had thought of it beforehand, I would have had it all ready before we set out, but I did not. Oh, and now Microsoft's got to update. Okay, I may give up on that. I may give up on that, you guys. Yep, I'm gonna. It may be ready for the next quilt. Okay, this one, Laura, forgive me. This one, we're winging it. Okay, so I'm turning on my basting stitch, and I'm doing this at 4 stitches per inch. And if you don't have a basting stitch on your machine, you can absolutely do this with your regular stitch length. And we've got something catching in our bobbin. Let's just try rethreading that for a second. I had my bobbin running smoothly before we started. I did test it. And I did oil everything up fresh before we came on air too, so we're all ready to quilt. Just try this off the quilt for a second. So this is such an interesting thing, you guys. This is what Live and Unscripted is all about. Me handling things as they happen in the moment. Can you see that when I go to pull up that bobbin thread, it's resisting, it's not flowing through? I honestly don't know why at this moment, but this is something that I talk about in some of my short YouTube episodes that are in the series Know Your Machine. It's pulling really hard now, so I couldn't sew with it, but sometimes when I start, I just get a little resistance or a little click when that thread runs around the bobbin. It really pays to know the exact feel and sound of your machine because you can head off ugly stitches and tension problems that way. So that's what I'm doing right now. It doesn't feel just right, so I'm just going to keep rethreading things and restarting until it does feel just right. Let's see. Nope, still not there. Okay, I'm confident the bobbin is correct, so now I'm going to rethread the top. Oops, scissors got caught. And I'm pretty confident the bobbin is right because I've done it 2 or 3 times and it feels right when I pull a foot of thread out. So I did not see anything visibly wrong at the top either, but we're going to give it a whirl. There it is, smooth as butter. So do I know exactly what the problem was? No, but I kept going until it felt and sounded like it oughta. So back to basting. Let's see if our computer's ready now. Hang on a sec. Now I can put my, engage my belts. Let's see if this works. There we go. So I still get that same resistance initially, which keeps me in a lovely straight line. But when I get it starting, then that glide kicks in and kind of pulls it. Really useful tool. And if you've got a Bernina and didn't know that, give it a whirl because it is really, really nice. What it does is keeps me stitching in a perfectly straight line. And on a mini, this feels pretty important to me. I need pretty accurate 90-degree corners and straight perimeters. Every little bit of inaccuracy is going to show like crazy. Beautiful. Now my little wee quilt is basted. And now we're going to set out to do that little bit of ruler work. Disengage my belt, so now again I'm running free motion. I can quilt in any direction. And I've gone ahead and set it up with my ruler foot. It's got the thicker profile. I'll just leave that on through this whole quilting session. It doesn't hurt anything. Mr. Producer's asking me something.
Question. Is this easier than quilting on the cruise?
Okay, you guys. Stories. Cruise stories. Let me get going here a sec first. Mr. Producer's asking me, tongue in cheek, is this easier than quilting on the cruise? And here's why he's asking. The very first class on the cruise, well, let me back up a little. We did the bulk of our classes on at sea days, right? When you can't get on shore and go exploring. So while we're at sea, which of course means the boat is moving in the water. And it was a fairly rough cruise. Like the whole week, there was significant motion. You could always feel it in the boat. So I delivered the first class, and my intention was to do kind of a live and unscripted episode and quilt a whole project. And I was quilting wavy lines back and forth and back and forth. Oh my goodness, I got so seasick. Whew. And I'm not prone to seasickness, but yeah, I had to take pauses and do bits of it here and there because that was something else. But we did get it done.
And we auctioned off the boat. Raffle off.
The little project that I was quilting is the patriotic Crazy Stars and Stripes by Janet Nesbitt that I was piecing a couple Fridays ago in a live episode. So that's the one I quilted. And then someone had the bright idea, so I took them up on it. We raffled the quilt, basically to the students that were there. And one of my favorite organizations, you might know already, is One Common Thread. And they support women in Honduras, teaching them how to sew and giving them supplies to sort of better their lifestyles. So we raffled off this quilt and sent the proceeds to One Common Thread. And that was fun. And now I've got to pay attention to my stitching. I'm going to go ahead and break thread here. I could have just gone into my little flying geese, but I want to show you guys something else before I go further. And that is, you've heard me talk about my plexiglass sheets before. So I was doing this afternoon before I got ready to quilt. And if I were you at home doing a mini like this, I would do the same thing. I sit with these sheets and I kind of brainstorm. Let me grab a marker. I brainstorm my ideas because for various reasons, some don't work. And I can sometimes figure that out before I lay stitches onto the actual fabric. So my original idea, trying to think what my original idea, I know what my original idea was. I was going to zigzag. Can we see this close up, Dave? If I move my machine, you guys can see it, right? He says he's got it. My initial idea was that I would just do this zigzag, hitting the points of those geese. Couple things I didn't love about that. Number one was, if I don't get the zigzags exactly the same size, I thought that would catch your eye if there were any irregularities. And number two, I thought probably just doing those between the rows of geese is not quite enough quilting. There's almost 2 inches of space then between the zigs. Getting a mic adjustment here. So I didn't think that was quite enough quilting on the inside. So I fiddled around with it a little bit to come up with something else that I could quilt on this particular mini. But I just wanted to point out the plexi sheet and how awesome that is when it like just fits on your quilting surface, and dry erase marker, and I have a piece of batting that I use for my eraser, and you can just try different things. And this in fact is big enough I could try several on my one sheet and just determine what that's going to be. And like I said, some things get weeded out, get jettisoned, because right off the bat I can see by drawing them, oh, that's not going to work, that's not going to produce the effect that I like. And so then out with that design, in with another one. Much easier to do it on a plexi sheet than stitching it and undoing, stitching it and undoing, right? Couple things about the sheet. Hardware store, it's just 1/8 inch plexi. Have some kind of tape on this top edge. Keeps you from inadvertently driving off with your marker, because you don't want to do that. And also there's always a right side that might have marker residue on it and a down side, and you always put the clean side on the quilt. So that tape border helps with all of that. Okay, moving that aside, I do have one behind me because I have my actual ideas drawn on one of these little boards that I can refer to as we quilt tonight. Do I need side clamps? Yes, I think I do. If I were quilting this one, just freehand edge to edge, by the way, I probably would not bother with these side clamps. It's such a small quilt. It's not really going to shift massively as I work across it, but I have learned the hard way that when you're quilting with a ruler, because you have your plate underneath and your ruler on top, and they're moving along your fabric, it really does pull it askew. So that's why I'm putting the clamps on the edges for the flying geese. These are just the little things. There's no always or rule about it. It's just, that's what experience has taught me, is that it will shift when I'm doing ruler work. And I'm apt to get a little pleat in the backing. And I don't want that. Okay, we're all set. So you'll see what I decided on for a quilting design as I get going here. I'm kind of thinking, I'm trying to decide if I want to do the central ones first. I think I do. Oh, and now I have a dilemma. My ruler plate being large underneath my quilting space is bonking into these on the edges, right? So I'm just going to put my trusty yardsticks under those clamps, holding them up. And I'll just test it to be sure that my ruler plate can slide underneath. Do you see that? It can slide underneath pretty smoothly. And you can adjust where your stick is to raise it a little more or a little less. Beautiful. All right. We're going to start on one of these in the middle. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. It's pretty simple. I'm sticking to pretty simple quilting because these quilts are so tiny. You just don't want to do hyper intricate stuff. I'm going to do one more thing. I've been stitching at 10 stitches per square inch, but again, these are so tiny. Every line I'm stitching is so short. Scale wise, I feel like 12 stitches per inch looks better. So I just adjusted that. So all I'm doing is stitching, and I'm trying to stitch an 1/8 inch on each side of this seam line of the cream colored portion. And Laura, I'm doing my best to be super accurate. And I'm not loving that because I can't keep it accurate enough. Okay, you guys can see that in the close-up, right? So I've got a couple choices here. One is if I think I'm going to like that design, because when I come back on the other side, it was going to make this little secondary geese. I still love my design. So my other option then is to go and mark it first. So I know exactly where to turn. I'm not by eye judging that 1/8 inch spacing. So I'm going to try that. Detailed marking like this is not a thing I do very often. But of course, there's just not that much of it on a mini either. And I'm also going back to 11 stitches per inch, maybe even back to my 10. These 12s are tiny. I sometimes think that different machines are calibrated just a smidge differently. I don't know if that's true or if it's just in my head. But on my Gamble machine, I used to always stitch 12 or 13 an inch. And on my Bernina, I do 10. And to me, it seems to look about the same. Go figure. Certainly is easier to undo at 10 per inch. 12 stitches per inch is a lot. This is something that I could not tell with my trial run on my plexi sheet, right? There are certain things that you don't know until you start quilting it, and it's kind of third dimension. That wasn't so bad. Okay, now let's get a little marking tool. Like this. I know right there's fine, Dave, but I can't mark there because, so we'll probably have to do the overhead camera. You guys have figured out what I'm doing is I'm just marking 1/8 of an inch away from those lines. I'll move Stella a bit so we can zoom in a little. I learned from a highly detailed custom quilter years ago that if you do want precision, particularly in spacing lines, you will always get a more precise result if you draw it first. Somehow, even though there are registration lines on the ruler that theoretically you can line up with, somehow when you have that drawn line to even make tiny, tiny adjustments to your needle, it helps. I'm bumping into my ruler plate. It's getting in my way.
Everybody must be glued because there's no comments.
This is approximately like watching paint dry. I know it is. I've lost my map here. There we go. We'll see how this works. I may be sorry that I'm trying to do something this precise, this small. But I am going to give it a whirl. I have some other ideas for the rest of the quilt that are not lines. There's so many lines and angles in these little geese. But I was a little stumped as to something, you know, free motion-ish, that wasn't just so incredibly tiny that you couldn't even see it. So I should be able to quilt that in 2 passes, one direction and then the other. And I'm going to go ahead and quilt it before I mark the rest of the quilt because I'm not 100% sure that this is going to be the winner. This is how it goes, you guys. There are times that I try something out like this and don't necessarily love it. It would not be the first time that I've undone something, but we're going to give it a whirl. But having those drawn lines there definitely does help. I have something to quilt to. I have something to gauge if I'm veering off just a little. It is certainly fine work. Laura will have to give me her feedback on this. And by the way, if you guys have any questions about making mini quilts, as of earlier today, Laura was planning to attend tonight, so if she's here in the chat, ask her some questions about it. Laura does a lot of minis, and a lot of times they are literally miniature version of lap quilts that she sends me as well. And so I don't know if these are her original work, if she does the math of scaling them down, but I would hit her up with your questions. If you can hear the little click in the background, I am actually turning my machine off every time I pause to reposition my ruler. Typically I do that. I just find if I don't, I end up oopsing and driving where I don't want to. Especially on something this tiny. Every little stitch of inaccuracy shows. What I'm endeavoring to do is not cut off the points of my little quilted geese, and essentially my little quilted bits will mimic, but upside down, the feast flying geese. They're so tiny. They're so tiny. Oops. So here's the scoop. I'm going to get my little spritzer bottle and moisten this a bit and get rid of the purple lines so that we can kind of judge what we think of that before I do any more lines. And it's probably a good time to pause for any questions or comments too.
There's not a lot of questions. There's not a lot of commenting.
Mr. Producer says not a lot of commenting is going on. What's happening? Not a good time of day for you all? Takes a minute for the purple to fade.
Want to run the camera over so you can see it?
Still quite purple in the corners, but I'll run the camera over so you can have a little look at it.
Slow.
I'm fairly pleased with that. I don't think that there's anything curlicue or leafy that I can do in between those that would look as well. So I will come back and do the triangles that run down this side as well. What I did not think of, you guys, is of course now that I made that damp, I can't mark with my purple marker. Whoops. Well, we'll do the one that's dry first and we'll see if that one gets dry enough. Otherwise, we'll go on to the borders. I don't think this one's dry enough either, frankly. No. Okay, we're going on to the borders. We'll come back to that. All right, my idea for the borders is ribbon candy. And here's why. The geese themselves, and obviously my quilting, are all lines, angles, very geometric. So I want contrast in these borders so they show up and so that there's differences in the quilting. So I have a larger swirly design planned for the outer border, but I thought for the ribbon candy I would do something curly and also something that goes fully from side to side of it, which I can make the ribbon candy do. I just like to fill it up in that way. So ribbon candy are us. Here we go. It's little ribbon candy. This is tinier than what you used to get in your stocking as a kid. Your Christmas stocking. Because Laura's seam lines are butted type borders, not 45 degree, I'm just going to follow that with my ribbon candy as opposed to trying to make a pretty angled corner. So I'm just going to go ahead and butt up my ribbon candy quilting design too. Interesting piece of trivia. I find it easier to do ribbon candy forwards and backwards than side to side. You might notice as I'm quilting I tend to do it faster, up and down and up, because I do find it easier. Shift my feet. I should have cut those thread tails at one of my pauses, and I didn't. Now I'm choosing not to stitch in the ditch around the edge of this little copper colored piece because my figure eights fill it pretty full right out to the border. I may at some point crawl underneath the quilt and make sure that I'm happy with that. But remember my kind of goal to keep my quilting somewhere near an hour of quilting time for each one. Yeah, my quilt is still damp. We may have to come back and finish that. What was I thinking, you guys? Do we have any comments or questions?
Yeah, we have a few.
Okay, let's take a moment for those before we dive into that outer border. Got stuff everywhere here. Okay, do you want straight on camera? There we go. Oh, let me move Stella. She's right in the middle. There we go. All right, Debbie, is the quilt on the wall a Bonnie Hunter Unity quilt? I love the design. You nailed it. You got it. It is not mine. I can take zero credit for it. My sister made it. I quilted it for her, and next week I'm going to visit her and taking it back with me. She lives in Canada. So I thought, might as well hang it up for 1 week while it's here still. And yes, Bonnie Hunter Unity quilt, I think with some variations. Jennifer, I'm having trouble tracing back over designs like pebbles. It feels like I'm in a blind spot. What should I focus on when you back trace a design? First off, I would make sure that you've got as closely matching thread as you can to the fabric that you're working on, because then the missed backtracks will be much less visible. Beyond that, I do recommend, and I do this myself, I recommend that you don't watch the needle, but watch where you're going. You will tend to be more accurate when your eye literally is where you're gonna go, not where the needle is stitching now. It just helps you gauge that better. There we go. The Easy Glide only works together with the Q-matic. That's correct. It's part of the computerized system on the Bernina, and it comes into effect when your belts are engaged and when the Q-matic program is in fact running. Yes. Connie, can you tell me what you have your speed set at? At the moment, I'm working with stitch regulation. So it's not the speed that I've set, it's the stitch length. I've got it set at 10 stitches per inch. So the motor is speeding up and slowing down with my movements in order to keep achieving that 10 stitches per inch.
Oh man, you cast your right the wrong one. There you go.
Vanessa, do you ever mark out your quilt before loading it on the Longarm? There has been the very odd occasion that for some reason when I thought just seeing my throat space wasn't enough and I've made some broader marking guidelines on it beforehand, but typically, no. Typically, I mark as I'm working. Leslie, have you tried a water pen instead of the mister? I have, and that's what I should have done. I have one of those. I just didn't think of that in, busy talking, frankly. And once I had made the first squirt, it was too late. How to get the ribbon candy so even? Mine are always lopsided. Oh gosh, it's funny, I say so often, quilting is like handwriting. And I don't know if you had the same type of cursive handwriting classes as I did, but my teacher was big on posture and angles and rhythmic quality. All of those things help, but usually it has to do with your approach into it. So maybe draw some lines on your practice paper or your doodle sheets, or in fact on your quilting surface, so that you know what is upright, and then you can make half of it on one side and half of it on the other, and train your eye to know what that half looks like, because usually you're making the first half either way too skinny or way too wide. We have different tendencies, quilters do, but it's one of those. And so having those straight lines and trying to make a symmetrical thing and practice that approach will help you start getting them more even. And it does take practice. There's just no way around it. Christy, good afternoon, Susan and Mr. Producer. I've had my small quilting business for about a year, new to long arm quilting. Do you have any advice for a new long armor? I struggle with how much to charge. I saw the dollar signs. Christy, I have happy news for you. I also have a podcast. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once. And I'm in season 5 right now. I think maybe 3 episodes have been released, and they come out weekly on Wednesdays. Next Wednesdays is very specific about how to find a price point for charging for your quilting services, crafting services in general, but I do zero in on long arming because that's what I know. And with that podcast, I provided a spreadsheet that's fillable that you can pop your variables into. So watch for that podcast episode. I think it'll be really helpful to you. Connie, follow-up question about speed. So it doesn't matter if it's 250 or 850 if the stitch regulator is on. Okay, I think I know what you're asking, Connie. When the BSR 1 stitch regulator is on a Bernina, you've got a coasting speed. And what the coasting means is even when the machine is holding still, the needle is bobbing up and down still. And that's where you would change the 350 or the 850, right? Is that what you're asking? And if so, that's what it'll affect, is how fast that needle bobs when you're paused. I keep mine fairly low. I have it at 250 actually. So when my machine is holding still, I'm still getting a gentle bob. But you could turn that faster so that when you're holding still, you're getting quite a fast bob, right? So that is still adjustable even when you're in stitch regulated mode. At the moment, I'm in BSR 2 because I'm using my ruler, which means when I pause with my machine, it stops stitching when I hold still. And I like that when I'm doing ruler work.
That's it.
Okay, that was all the questions. It is still damp, you guys. So we're going to go ahead and work on the outer little border. I'll move Stella again so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to do a curlicue type design. Again, this is a little quilt, so I don't want a crazy amount of design in there. I did think about it. I was like, you know, I could do some bubbles and I could do some picket fencing, and I like, no, way too much stuff. So all I'm going to do with my chalk, I've got a chalk pencil in my hand, is I'm going to draw some dots for placement. I'm going to do large swirls, right? And I want to get them fairly symmetrical. Again, because this quilt is so tiny, I don't have much room to like stretch them out or squeeze them in. On the other hand, it's only a few swirls in order to mark them. So in each corner and in the middle and between that. So I've got 5 even ones there. Can I get 7 here? I think I can. I'm going to try to. So there's 7 down each long side because it's easier to do an odd number with 1 in the middle. You know what? I could do that at 6. I could. I can figure that out. Hang on a sec. No, I don't want to put any more water on my quilt. No, no. I was going to go get a damp piece of batting, but I think I can figure this out. Okay, I'm going to by guess and by gosh it, and I'm going to make 6 circles on here, and those are going to be where my swirls are placed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep.
You're still at 7. You put 1 in.
Nope. This one right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These two are just a little too close. This is called fudging it. Sorry, Laura. I'll do better on the other side, and I'll quilt that one first because then I'll have the hang of it by the time I get to the second side. And you'll see as I quilt this design, it doesn't massively matter which direction I'm heading into the swirl on the corners. So whether I come into it sort of from the right or from the left, I'm going to make it work. Those are fairly even. Fairly being the operative word. I think that's all I need the chalk for. And I'm going to go ahead and do this in my copper colored thread. I thought about doing it in black, but it really won't show at all if I do it in black, and I don't love that idea. So I'm going to do one more marking with my pencil. On one corner, maybe I'll do it on this lower one. On one corner, I'm going to draw a circle that's the size of my swirl. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to start my quilting on that circle so that when I lap around the quilt and come back, I can hit my stitching line. And if I didn't draw a circle, like where would I start my stitching, right? So this does not always work out perfectly, but having the circle certainly makes my chances of getting a nice match better. I'm going to start on the inside of it. Let's see how this goes. We might all get surprised together. Okay, let me just look at my plexi sheet again because I was practicing these earlier. I'm doing kind of a little tendrily design, is my plan. With a little leaf in it. Little trick for you guys. Notice how I am not exactly backtracking right here. I'm purposely letting it echo like a ribbon, because why stress yourself over exact backtracking when you can do an inexact one, and it holds true with my tendril theme. Stella is really rattling, which is funny because I oiled her well before I began. It sounds like she's asking for oil again. Possibly she's annoyed at getting left behind from the cruise. Who knows? And if you love tenderly designs like this, I get a lot of my ideas for these from Sue Hines, who's a fabulous quilter, and she has published a number of books just with very original quilting designs. And she does a whole bunch of these different leaves, different little add-ins, if you will, to these tenderly type designs. And that's where I went today when I was trying to think of what I wanted to put in this area. I went and hunted out one of Sue's books. Now I got to pay attention so I get my dots evenly spaced. I'm just going to pause for a second here, clip my little thread tails, and now as I go around that circle, I'm going to try and pass right over those initial starting lines so that they become part of the design, and hopefully it's not a real obvious beginning and ending right there. Did a few stitches very close together to kind of lock that in place. I'll give you guys a close-up look. You know, is it an exact perfection? Probably not. But is it as close as some of these other backtracks that I did? Yes. So to me, that's satisfactory. No one would know where I began or ended that design. So our trusty little quilt is still damp. So I think we're going to leave this one as is. You've gotten to see all the parts of it. It's just not quite finished. And we're going to move on to another little quilt. Any thoughts or comments on this one before we go? Mr. Producer says nope. Tell you what, you guys are a quiet crowd. Next, we are going to go down to the little, I'm just looking for my scissors. I'm going to trim off some of this extra batting so I don't get too chunky of a roll. And we're going to head down to the little black and red and white one. I'm doing that one with a pretty simple edge-to-edge design, so it will go super quickly. And then we'll head into number 3, which is viewer's choice. So last chance for you to answer that poll as to whether we do the strawberry pot. Oh, poll's done, Mr. Producer says. That train has left the station. So I'm looking through Laura's little notes for red, black, and white. Here it comes. Right there. Grab us a little piece of batting. Not sure if that's one big, if that one is big enough, but if not, we'll grab another one. It is. Look at that. Perfect. Okay. On this one, thread-wise, I mean, clearly my choices are pretty much red, black, white, and I suppose I could choose gray. But I narrowed it down to red and black because there's more predominant deep colors than light ones. And I've got it's actually not truly black, it's a very deep charcoal, and a red. Both of them look great on there. Which do I want to choose? And for me, it came down to, well, which one is going to look best on the backing? And so that, I think, is the red. So let us do the red. And it just so happens that one of the other quilts is going to has a red backing as well. So I've already got a bobbin loaded. It's one shade darker, but I'm going to use it for the both of them. So that's what we're going to load into the bobbin. And while I do this, I'm going to give Stella another drop of oil. Did you guys notice I'm in my serious comfy duds tonight? I've just been in a relaxing state, let me tell you, since we got home from the cruise. That was so much fun, but also such an incredible amount of work. And for me, I don't know, I just, it takes a lot for me to like be on and aware and thinking about all the things and organizing and the teachers and what time and all this stuff. So when I came home after a week of that, I was just relaxing. So tonight I actually asked Mr. Producer, I was like, is anyone going to care if I wear leggings and a sweatshirt? And he thought no. And of course my almost always bare feet. That's just what I quilt in.
They're in plain view today.
Yeah, you can probably see lots of the feet today when I don't have a big quilt loaded. All right, and this is a little bit brighter red than I loaded that bobbin with, but the brighter red suits this quilt better, so that is what I'm going to load into the needle. So in Laura's notes, she had a suggestion for this quilt, which is a design I've done for her lots of times. She calls it a box in a box in a box. And for those of you who are my students, I call it mod boxes. And I'm just going to scale it down a little bit, do it a little smaller than I would typically quilt it, and put it all over this little quilt top. So much like with the little flying geese one, I'm going to engage my belt so that I can get a nice, crisp, 90-degree corner in every corner of my quilt. So I get nice straight lines. Notice as I'm stitching, Laura has put in, she does this on a lot of her quilts, this little victory lap, this little line of stitching that's about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. That is so nice to keep any of the seams from pulling open. And as with this little one, you've got a seam every inch. Those can easily start, you know, pulling open and kind of stretching out and distorting the edges of this quilt. And that little victory lap is very, very helpful. Pull it toward me just a touch. There we go. Now I have just by eye arranged my quilt on the batting here. And I'm just nudging it to coincide with the straight line that my machine is stitching as I go. I say this quite often, but if you're not comfortable putting your fingers in the way of danger like this, by all means, just drop a few pins in your quilt to keep it in place as you're working. We had a conversation on the cruise about how many people had inadvertently stitched into a finger. I never have. My bobbin thread broke. Not sure what happened there. I never have done it, so knock on wood. Not sure why the bobbin thread popped, but let's go pull out a tail. Stitch that little corner again. This, by the way, is, in my opinion, what's best about my live and unscripted show is the fact that I show things like this because they happen. And I don't know, a lot of quilters, for whatever reason, and I'm not being critical, but for whatever reason, their videos they'll be edited, right? And they're trying to teach you something, and so they take out all the extraneous bits and just leave in the good bits, the productive bits. And I try in my live shows to, even at the risk of embarrassment to myself, which does happen from time to time, to just show you the reality of it, right? So that happens. Bobbin threads break. Needle threads break. I decide I don't like the quilting design and I rip it out and change it. Things do happen. So I like to show what I consider to be my reality. Yeah. We need to disengage those belts. All right, this time I'm not going to bother putting the side clamps on. As I mentioned earlier, like this is so small, I have pretty good control. Like I'm not too worried about my backing wrinkling, right? When I was quilting with the ruler, that was shifting it. But since I'm not going to use my ruler this time, I'm quilting all free motion, it's going to be just fine as is. You know, again, not a rule. If you're more comfortable having those in place, by all means do it. But I'm pretty okay with it not. So we are now just going to quilt some simple little boxes. I know it must be terribly tricky for you to see the quilting, but you'll get glimpses of it here and there. And note that I am not quilting pointed, sharp corners on my boxes. I find it easier to quilt, and I certainly like the look better of slightly rounded corners. So it's still very definitely a box, but those corners have a slight curve to them. I find it very difficult to make a sharp, crisp corner every time. I end up with lines that do not run 90 degrees then. And maybe that's just me, but I find these little slightly curved ones easier to quilt, and I like the look of it. So all I'm doing, as you see, is going over and over and over these boxes, overlapping the corners. And in general, I'm quilting on my left. I'm filling this side in first, and then I'll work my way kind of diagonally, filling in the top edge and working my way across. And the reason I do that is just so that I can see all my sewing area. I don't want to get bits that are right in front of me quilted too fast compared to bits that are further away. So this method of working across the quilt really works for me. And it keeps these boxes from all being in a row, because I'm kind of building them diagonally. So you'll really see it now as I angle back toward the bottom. It's overall moving in a kind of diagonal way. I'm just going to pause for a minute, and just to look back over, I just want to make sure I'm not leaving any areas that have a large unquilted expanse. I want it to be fairly even. And if I thought it wasn't, I would literally zigzag my way back through some of those areas. And it's difficult to see, so I just have to pause to do that from time to time. I'll do it once more before I'm totally finished. Take another peek. There is one spot I wish I had put more in, so I'm going to, it's near the top, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this area, and then I'm going to travel in my basting line and around the outside edge. I'm just going to go back to that area that I wish had a little more, and put a little more in it. Right here. And I've just left my regular stitch length on. This is going to get buried in the binding. Nobody will ever see it. I'm just going to get as close as I can to that little area. And sometimes when I'm doing this on a big quilt, I will literally just zigzag my way all the way back through the quilt till I get to that spot. I would rather have a little too much quilting in a couple spots than have one giant unquilted bit. There we go. And that one is done. And I'm going to pan over it for you, although I know you can't see the quilting very much. But let's give you the best look that we possibly can. You can see the little rounded corners. Can you see that one? There we go, right there. That's a good example of those slightly rounded corners. Okay. Any comments or questions on that one?
We've got a few if you want them.
All right, let's have them.
Okay, I have just getting there.
Takes a second to get them on the screen.
This is about your outfit.
Oh, this is about the outfit. Isn't that normal quilting attire or jammies? Yes, it is, but it's not always my on-camera attire. But it's what you got today. Connie, please indulge me one more question about the speed. The person who trained me does not like to hear the motor rev. So I guess I'm asking, should the speed be higher or lower, or do I just need two? And did we get a second half?
No, she didn't finish that. I'll
Okay.
put a little stretch by them, but I
So it sounds like, Connie, that you were, like if the person who trained you doesn't like hearing the motor rev, the only way to not hear the motor going faster and slower is to be in manual or constant mode. So that is where you would set the speed only, regulate my movement. I mean, every quilter has those options, and I use both. Tonight I'm using regulated, partly because I'm working in such small spaces. I'm not making any kind of big movements, partly because I'm doing ruler work, betwixt and between. But certainly you could use that unregulated or constant where you do just set that needle speed and the needle just goes, and it's up to you to move smoothly to get even length of stitches. That's entirely personal preference, whether you want to hear the motor rev or not. So don't let anybody say you should do it this way or that way. Do what works for you. Stitch regulation is a really great tool, especially when you're doing fine stuff like this and ruler work. So my 2 cents. Jean, I have trouble getting rid of the purple pen. Suggestions? For me, Jean, I live in a very dry climate, so it tends to stay on my quilts too. They're air erasable, but if you live in a humid climate, they erase very quickly just because of the moisture in the air. When I use a fair bit of purple marking in a quilt, and I would say this one is a fair bit, like literally drawing lines, my preference is to actually rinse it afterwards, like flush it away. So even when it disappears with time or with a little bit of moisture, that chemical is still in the quilt. And, a week down the road, you could get some water on it inadvertently, and that purple would vividly show up again. So when I use it on client quilts, I tell them that too. I don't usually rinse their quilts, but I know that Laura's fabric was all pre-washed, so I knew it was safe to use the marker. And so I will recommend, if you're hearing this, Laura, here's your recommendation, like an actual thorough rinsing of them to get all that marking and chemical out. Again, my 2 cents.
don't know what this means. You might know what this means.
Okay, Edie's asking, do you have a consistent, so do you mean a consistent stitch length, consistent speed? Maybe elaborate on that and I'll try and answer that.
Oh, here we go.
Here it comes. Consistent pattern in mind for your boxes. No, I wouldn't say I do, Edie. No, I don't. I either go boxes or sometimes I go steps. It's kind of a combination of those two things, but it just depends. I'm just trying to fill in the area. I wing it. Corey, these mod boxes remind me of how I played with my Etch-a-Sketch when I was little. Why haven't I tried this on my Longarm yet? It's a fun design, and it's super good practice for getting fairly straight lines, free motion. And, you know, it doesn't matter if they aren't perfect throughout the quilt. It still is great texture, even if you have a few wonky ones in there. Cheryl, what is the throat space on Stella? It's 24 inches. So that's from needle to back of machine. Laura, Susan, I will. Thank you for letting me know. That's flushing the purple marker out. Beautiful. Okay, let's get on to another quilt. What was our final on the tally on the viewer's choice?
Poll.
We're looking.
Do I even know anymore?
Does the
54 to 45 for the comedy club.
For the comedy club, 54 to 45. So you guys were pretty evenly split for the comedy club.
Within a margin of error, so I think you do them both.
Okay. Mr. Producer says, I think you do them both. Don't we have something else this evening, though?
Yes, we do.
Sir? Yeah, we do. Okay, let's roll ahead because I happen to know the comedy club is right at the end. And here we are. So let's read the notes on this because this had a story too. Let's see. There is a smaller version of the Comedy Club, which is square. It was a challenge block. Laura's small quilt group is called Off Kilter Quilters. Isn't that cute? Yeah, I'll read you some of the corny little one-liners. They're pretty cute. Anyway, she liked her original one so well that she made a repeat of it for herself. And this one's a little bit longer, a little bit bigger. So that's the one I'm going to do first off. Let's read you some of the jokes. Okay. Off Kilter Quilters Comedy Club presents an evening of quilting stand-up. What do you call a gathering of quilters? A block party? How do babies of quilters learn to walk? With a walking foot. How did the police realize the burglar was also into quilting? They were following a pattern. I love it. Love it, love it. Okay, so here's our little quilt.
I'll hold up the main camera. I'll get you on that.
Main camera.
1 second.
Coming. There we go. There we go. You can see it. So essentially, we've got these little talking bubbles, right? And we've got the person, and we've got the sign, and there's the brick wall behind the talking bubbles. So my idea is to quilt a brick design on the brick wall, but of course they're very tiny. They're like 1/4 inch by 3/4 inch bricks on the fabric, so I'm not going to quilt them quite that busily. But I thought maybe every 3rd brick for height. I'm going to quilt around the bubbles, and I don't know if I'll do anything else in them. And Laura asked for a few stars on the sign. Let me just review that to make sure. Stars on the sign, quilt however you like. Okay, great. We can handle that. This has another thread point. Let me see if I can find my bits and bobs here. I'm not sure how clearly this will show on the overhead camera, but what I've got in my hand is a brown thread and a deep maroon thread. The bricks, of course, don't match either one quite right. So which to use? I mean, either one will be okay, which to use. And here's how I decided. I thought, it's a fun quilt, right? It's a comedy night. So of course I'm going to go with the more fun thread, but either one would absolutely work. It's amazing in all my stack of thread that I don't have any quite that color, quite brick colored. So I believe my backing is black, as you can see, and I think that my burgundy thread is a deep enough shade that I can put my deep charcoal thread on the bottom and use the same bobbin thread throughout. So though I will change my needle thread into a deeper charcoal when I get to the bottom of this, I'm going to start with this burgundy, but go ahead and put the charcoal in the bobbin. My eyes must be a bit tired. I'm having a heck of a time threading my take-up lever here. Good thing I have a needle threader. Okay, bobbin thread. I've got so many threads and bobbins here. Oh, and I just popped the spring out of my bobbin case. Don't you hate when that happens to you? I'm going to cheat, you guys. I'm going to totally cheat. I have a second bobbin case. And that's what I'm going to use. Inserting a spring back into a bobbin case is not a job for tired eyes. It must be accurate. Okay, since I haven't been using this casing in a little while, I am going to go ahead and grab my toa gauge and take it out for a spin. Needs a little bit of tightening. So quilting on the cruise, which I alluded to earlier and how it made me seasick. I don't know. We did not really know what that would entail, actually quilting on the cruise, right? Or what it would be like. We had 2 long arms there. And of course, my class, I was quilting. As I described earlier, I was quilting a small project. So a fair bit of quilting. And I underestimated how much it affects you. Like even the tiniest shift of the boat made the machine pull. And it's a 40-pound machine, right? So that tiny shift and you'd be racing across and then it would shift the other way and you'd be zooming back toward you. I mean, I kept control of the machine, but it was impossible to keep it even and smooth. So we had a good time laughing at ourselves. Let's just put it that way. Okay, let me just get my threads organized a tiny touch here so I don't run over any of them. Okay, we're golden. We need batting. We do need a piece of batting. One more of my little scraps. Okay, there must be funny comments. Mr. Producer's just chuckling. I've got to know. What are the comments?
They were all asking about the batting, and I said,
Oh.
shh, let's see if she remembers.
Well, it would feel pretty funny to start quilting without batting. I think I would clue into that.
How are the words in the word bubbles?
Lori, you might have an answer for that. It looks to me like they're done on a printer, probably an inkjet printer. They're not stitched. And there's fusible under there in some way too. Let's whack our belts in place again. We've got to back the quilt up a little bit. My ruler plate's hitting the front. That's probably lots. Perfect. Oh, once again, we have that funny bobbin pull. Okay, this time I'm just going to start right off by rethreading the needle. Let's see if this works this time.
Somebody asked if we should have a poll if you remember the batting.
You guys are having fun at my expense, wondering if you should have a poll about the batting. I mean, it would not be the first time I forgot something critical. I've certainly forgotten the side clamps more than once. Sorry, I bumped the camera there a few times in threading. Oh, here we are again, trying to make these old eyes thread things. Okay, I have a useful tip for you because I love sharing tips. I learned this from a dealer not very long ago. The threader on... oh, I thought you were on that. Sorry. Okay, this is the threader on a Bernina machine, right? And I can thread my needle and you can see that it's pulling up a little loop at the back. There's a little tiny wire that pulls up that little loop. And I usually just grab that loop and pulled it out, right? Which kind of makes sense to me. Well, there's the tiny wire that does in fact grasp the thread and pull it through. A couple times I've popped that out of place on my threader and I've had to have it fixed. And at one point I actually bought a new threader, this little attachment, which is tiny but also $50. So I was asking this technician about it and he gave me a tip. You guys should try this. He said you pull the loop downwards. Did you see that? How I pulled down instead of pulling sideways, and it does not dislodge the wire then. Haha. So there's your handy Bernina tip for the night. And I have not dislodged a wire since, but that's only been about 2 months since I heard that story. So we'll see how long it lasts. Funny corner there. Come on, grab a stitch. There we go. And boy, did I miss my red Solo cup on the cruise. Can't even count the times I reached up above my machine to toss the thread tails. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to quilt the bricks first. My idea is, and I described this partly a minute ago, I'm going to quilt in some brickwork on this bricky area. I'm going to quilt around the bubbles. I'm going to put some stars in the sign. And I think I'm going to quilt on this lower edge. It kind of has some like wood-looking stripes running horizontally, but I felt like if I'm quilting lines on the bricks, that's going to be a bit too much horizontal lines in my picture. So I think I'm going to do diagonal lines on there with the ruler, but I want to do that in my charcoal thread. So we're going to leave that one for the moment. I think I will go ahead and put my side clamps on. I don't know, this one just doesn't feel as secure to me, so let's put these in place, and then we're going to freehand the bricks in. This brick idea, I've certainly seen it done before, but I recently saw it in some pictures by Julia Quiltoff. Some of you may know her, follow her on Facebook or Instagram. She's a fabulous quilter. I've never met her in real life, but she was doing a quilt and putting this brick texture in, and I thought, ooh, that's so pretty. And here comes my opportunity to try it. Now the question is, should I go around the bubbles first and then track in those lines? And I don't know the answer to that question. So we're just going to start. I'm just going to start building bricks. For me, it's going to be side to side, but in the finished result, hopefully it's going to look like rows from the top down. Am I going to hit that edge? I am. Got to put my little yardsticks under here again. I could also have stopped and taken my ruler plate off, but I didn't. So since it's on, I'm going to go ahead and go around my person with my red thread on the brick area, and then I'll leave the dark portion of her for the dark thread. Because on the back of the quilt, it will look the same all the way because it's got the charcoal thread. And on the top of the quilt, this side, I think the red will look best on this side. Some quilters do this using a tiny ruler to kind of give themselves resistance and hold in place. My machine guides quite easily, so I'm choosing so far to do it freehand. It's working okay. It's a little wobbly there. I'm going to go ahead across her waist, like so. And here. Now we'll go around the sign. I find it helpful when I'm doing close work like this to keep my elbows fairly close in to my body. That gives me a little more control than being entirely loose, if you will. Okay, rows of 3, Susan, rows of 3. I'm going to end up doing an area here and then going back to other areas. It's just the way it's going to work. And some of these places will have a couple rows of stitching overlapping. I'm okay with that. Like this. As I travel to the next brick line. What I'm going to do here is go ahead and do the bubble now that I'm right beside it. Do the bubble, and I think I will stop and do the bricks. These in-between areas while I'm here. Oh, I should have gone the other way. There's 3 on my brick right there. There's 3 again right there. I think I'll work my way back to the other side of the quilt now. Right here. Oops, this line. This line. This line. See if the math all comes out at the end. And go ahead around. I'm just going to double check my math before I go put these in. 3, 3, 3. Yep, we're spot on. Look at that. Almost like I planned it that way. And I'm not going to sweat too much over whether my... I'm going to go back down here. I'm not going to sweat too much over whether my bricks are perfectly offset, like half a brick. I feel like it's casual enough. And also, the fabric is busy enough. No one's going to see it. Where I can, where I have open expanses like this, I will. But I'm not going to sweat too much about it. I think that looks pretty good. So now my bricks are about a little more than a ½ inch by 1 1/4 inch, 1.5 inches. That's perfect size for scale of quilting on a little project this size. Right there, right there, right there. Perfect. My next line will be all the way across the quilt. Here again, I've run up against a bubble, so I'm just going to go all the way around it while I'm here. It involves a bit of backtracking, but not too much. 3 lines, 3 lines. We got to get back into that middle area. There's just no getting around it. Laura, I hope people aren't looking too closely at the back of this quilt. It's going to look a little bit like first graders quilting. Simply because I'm tracking over some of these curves. And I absolutely could bring a ruler to bear, but I don't think I could see it well enough to make it perfect in any event. Certainly from the front, you won't notice the wibbles and wobbles. Now I got to figure out my spacing again. Right here. 3, 3. Yep, spot on. On that last yellow speech bubble, I stitched over it just a little bit, and I may go back and undo that. I have learned over time that it's better to stitch a little further away than to be so paranoid and try to get so close to it and then inadvertently stitch up over things. This comes into play like when I'm stitching in the ditch too. It's better to just be a stitch or two away than to stitch up over top, in this case of one of these bubbles. Three. Just trying to think how best to do this part in the center. There's no perfect answer. Okay, so I've still got a bit over in that corner. Right here. Sorry, just had to get organized there. Okay, one more row of bricks at the top and we've got her. That's the best masonry I've done in a while. There we go. So I'd love to hear opinions on whether you think I should quilt inside these bubbles. So they're all about 2 inches tall, maybe a little shy of that, and 3 to 4. I do have a ruler here. It does not have inch markings on it. Yeah, that's the 4-inch mark. They're about 4 inches long. The thing is, they do have fusible on the back of them, and I feel like stitches over those words would break up the reading of the words. So my inclination is to leave it be, but I think I will do a couple more details in our girl. I'm going to do the bit between her legs that's against the brick in this color thread, and then I'm going to put a lighter one on to do her face. Now if I was really thinking ahead, I could, because I have all these little quilts loaded up, like I could have done my caramel color from the flying geese. So I may do that. In fact, I may just leave this now until I'm ready to do the flying geese and then come back and put the caramel in her. And the way that I remind myself of those sorts of things is I get my big trusty corsage pin and I'll just tuck it in the poor girl's face or maybe in the bricks beside her, just to remind me there's something there that I want to come back and quilt still. Okay, having that done now, let's put on the charcoal thread and do the flooring. And then Laura's one request was a few stars on the sign. I think I will come back and do that in an ivory thread, or possibly a gold metallic thread. That would be kind of cute too, to put the little stars on the comedy quilter. But for now, we'll get the charcoal. How are we doing for time, Mr. Producer, sir?
We're an hour and 45, and it is 5:46.
All right, we're doing pretty good for time, actually. After this flooring, we'll go back and check those geese and see if they're ready to do a little more finishing work on them.
Is there room to do an 1/8" inside the bubble? Like a circle inside the bubble?
Someone is asking, apparently, if there's room to do an 1/8" circle inside the bubble. And the answer is there's absolutely room. But number one, I feel like I would have to match every thread color. Like, I don't think the brick color would look good or the charcoal would look good. And the words are quite close to the edge. The gold metallic, you know, I probably could. I really question whether I can get something accurate enough to match those curves. I may try one. I don't know that I'll do it on camera. I may try one and see how it comes out. I'm a little worried that the needle holes will show, you know, because it's got the fusible web. And if I don't like it, I'm going to be stuck with it. I don't love that idea. Or stuck with needle holes.
The overall is saying leave them unquilted, though.
Apparently, many of you are suggesting leave it unquilted. That's kind of my thought right now. I'm going to get my trusty chalk. On this flooring area that I want to do the diagonal lines on, I'm not going to mark every one in. I'm only going to put a few chalk lines in because I think I'm going to do a 45-degree angle. I could really pick any one, but I kind of want the angle to look consistent. I kind of want it to look like you're looking across the room, across the stage at the comedy person. That's my thought anyways. So I'm just going to drop a couple lines in there, and then I'll just freehand my placement of the ruler, but it keeps my angle from gradually shifting. Make sense? So that's the only reason that I'm dropping in a few lines like this, just to keep myself organized when I get to quilting it. So I keep those lines all running at about the same angle. It probably would add perspective if I purposely went one way. I don't know that, so I'm not going to mess with that. I'm sticking with my original plan. I am going to quickly go around the girl and the sign. Do I want to do that first? I do. Actually, I want to start right at this seam, and I'm going to kind of stitch in this ditch. The ditch is on the charcoal side of this seam. Is it, or is it open? I think it's open. So I've got to stitch just a tiny, tiny bit to one side of it. My charcoal thread. And we're going to stitch around her leg. Go all the way around her little shoe. Now, I'm trying to decide if I want to work my way back up with the stripes or down with the stripes. I think I'm going up with them. I just want to turn this on BSR2 so that I don't, in fact, have the coasting stitching going on when I stop. I want it to actually stop when I'm holding still. So I'm just traveling between these lines in my earlier outlining stitching. And I'm already starting to use that chalk line that I put in earlier. I won't necessarily ever quilt it, but it's just my visual guide for am I keeping the angle of my little lines consistent. And I've got to come back and put one more in here. Right there. I'm cutting across between her shoes. Otherwise I have to go all the way up around her legs again. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Here again, I've got to go back and fit in a small one, and I can see my angle is not great there. Not great. Let's see if I can do better. There it is. And chalk is super easy to remove. I usually come back in with just a piece of batting moistened with a little bit of water and just brush, and it comes right off. Those chalk lines will disappear in a jiffy. Oh, the stars, the stars, the stars. Let's do stars, just because it's fun. Let's do metallic thread. I think that was a great idea. Okay, I have to run off camera for a sec to my thread stash and see what I've got here for metallic, because I quite like that idea. This is gold metallic thread, and it is by Madeira. It is still a 40 weight, so it should behave fairly similarly for the tiny little bit that I'm quilting here. I will say, if I was doing any major amount of this, I would set up a little practice piece, because there's quite a difference, or there can be quite a difference between metallic thread and regular thread in terms of tension and how it behaves in long lines of stitching. But because I'm just going to do some tiny little stars, I'm thinking, initially I had thought 5-pointed stars, but now I'm thinking more like an asterisk shape is what I'm thinking now. Yes, I think an asterisk will be a lovely thing. I wonder how that dark thread on the bobbin is not going to work good. No. Don't want to do that. It will show in the needle holes. So let's actually, even though the backing of this quilt is black, let's put something like the white sign. Again, running to my thread stash. Be right back. Because this is more important that this looks good on the sign side of the quilt than how odd the little white stars are going to look on the back part of the quilt, in my opinion. So now I've got eggshell in the bottom, metallic gold on the top, and this is, all these fabrics are quite papery feeling, and there's a hole right where I started that, so I think I'm right about stitching on these. Like, I literally could not undo and redo it because there's holes where the needle goes in. So I'm going to leave them. I'm going to leave well enough alone. But I am going to go ahead and put these little asterisks in here. And I will stitch right over that hole so it will not show. Can you hear the paper? Let me just trim my tails. Laura, I hope this suits the stars that you envisioned. I really do. There's one little star. How many should we do? 3? One on this side and one down there. I think that sounds about right. There's 2. Perfect. Let's see. Can you see my little stars? I'm pretty pleased with that. So it gives this larger area a little bit more quilting. I kind of wish I'd done this one more in the center, but it is what it is now. Gives it a little more quilting, which is a good thing, while adding a little sparkle, also a good thing. I'm happy with that. So all that's left on that one is coming back and doing a little more detail around her head. Again, I'll pan over it just a touch so you can see it. Just because this area of her, again, is 4 inches from top to bottom, right? And so I just feel like even going around her hair and perhaps her chin, but I want to do that in a much lighter thread. Okay, let's go back and check out our flying geese. If, as I suspect, they're still a little damp because they've been rolled up, then I think we'll call it for tonight, and I will just expose them so they dry and come back in the morning and finish them up. We're nearly there. Yes, it is still a little damp. So that's what we'll do. We'll call it for tonight. We got to work on 3 of them, so that was awesome. And yeah, we've got some questions. We can talk through a few of those before we go.
Okay.
All right.
This is as per the cruise.
Talking about the cruise. Jackie, does quilting wavy lines on a wavy ship turn out straight lines? No, it does not. It turns out white caps is what it does. It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny. When the thread broke, Stella is mad you neglected her. You know, I did think of that. It was funny the night we got home from the cruise. I have a black cat. Many of you have seen him before. He was a little put out with me. He was like all over me that first night. Like, I am not letting you out of my sight again. So maybe Stella feels much the same way. Corey, what batting are you using for these minis? I have all these scraps are 80-20 by Windline. So 80% cotton, 20% polyester. A good all-purpose batting. Jackie, have you put binding on minis on Stella? I've put binding on all kinds of things on Stella. For me anyway, I just put the binding on the top side, and then it would involve flipping it around and either top stitching it by machine or hand stitching it down. So I do binding fairly often, more for clients than for me on the long arm. Yeah. Debbie, do you ever worry about the pin catching on other fabric when you roll it in the quilt? Typically it doesn't, Debbie. I just make my pin go horizontally if I'm ever tucking one in the quilt like that, and I've never had trouble with it catching. It's not rubbing against fabric, it's just rolled up and it's fine. And all Laura's little markers are still on here too. I just made all the pins go horizontally so they just roll smoothly in, and it's no worries. Susan, do you have to change the needle with metallic? Do you know there are metallic needles, and I think they have a bit bigger hole? I did not in this case, as you saw. It's a 40 weight metallic, so it's quite fine. And my thread also is a 40 weight. So that was pretty similar, and it seemed to work just fine. Right now I've got a top stitch needle loaded, which has a bit longer eye as well than your universal needle. So, and looks like you're stopping with needle up in BSR2. Why is that? Was I stopping with needle up? Hang on a sec, Anne. Let me look. Nope, stopping needle down. So I don't know if I hit my half stitch button maybe that you saw. Not sure. What is the scissors holder? Oh, great question. Okay, can we get a big view of Stella again? Can you see that? Okay, so right here, this is where I can release this clamp and I can adjust the handle of my machine. And so that's the clamp. And it just has this little hole in it that's the perfect size. And I can adjust how far around it goes. So I just put it at a convenient spot. I adjust it until it's at a convenient spot to drop my slim little snips in there. That's what it is. I'm not the first Bernina owner to do that, but it is a really handy little spot for the snips.
I think.
While Mr. Producer checks back for any more questions or comments, let me mention one more thing since I haven't been on air in a coon's age. If you're looking for more quilting designs, more free motion work, particularly because that's what I do, or even just more quilting community, consider my quilting membership. I call it Advance, not advanced like you're a super advanced quilter, just advance, kind of a play on advancing your quilt and advancing your skills. So in it, I include 2 new lessons are released each month, and they include all kinds of things. Some of them are edge-to-edge free motion designs. Some of them are custom quilting. Some of them are case studies, so like a close step-by-step look at a particular project that I worked on. Some of them are guest presenters, all kinds of things. So I release 2 new ones each month. And what happens, because it's a subscription, is when you're paying your monthly subscription, you have access to all the lessons that have ever been released. And there's getting close to 200 now that are in there. And then if you stop your subscription, which you can do at any time, then it all goes away. So it's literally subscription based like that. It's like getting a magazine in the mail. You subscribe and you receive it, or you don't subscribe and you don't. Make sense? Anyway, I invite you to join that if you wish. It is $12.97 a month, so the price of 2 decent coffees at Starbucks. But you can find a link for joining that on my website, stitchedbysusan.com, and just go to the Learning tab and scroll down till you see the membership. We'd love to have you as part of that. There is a Facebook group which students can have community in as well. Occasionally I'll do live Q&A sessions in there, things like that. So that's what's all in that group. Any more questions, Mr. Producer? One more question. Cheryl, are the thread holders magnetic? Meaning the thread holders on top of the machine, Cheryl? And no, they're not. They're just pegs, and they have styrofoam in the bottom that the cone sits on, and that's all. One more. Thanks, Susan and Dave. Loved it, even if it's very late now. Yes, because you're in the Netherlands, 3 o'clock in the morning. Oh my goodness. Thank you for staying. That's very sweet of you. It's worth it. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. Well, I'm done a certain amount of traveling. It is reduced over the next month or 2 and then reduced even further when summer comes along. So I'm hoping to do more of these live and unscripted episodes. I do enjoy them. I appreciate your feedback. I'd love to know from some of you in the comments what kinds of things you're looking for. Typically, I do a client project from start to finish, so that's what I'm going to continue doing for the foreseeable future. But if there's something specific that you want to see, or like wavy borders, or what to do when a quilt's not square, I'll do my best to capture a client quilt that has that in mind and give you a look at that. So thanks so much for joining us. Once again, I'm Susan Smith. This has been Live and Unscripted in my studio, Stitched by Susan, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.